welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic, cult, and current films and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lerhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film, television, and pop cultural history one memory at a time. Tonight we enter the independent filmmaking world and introduce Sight, a gripping new time travel drama. And I'm a bit of a time travel enthusiast myself, so when my friend producer Ben Cooke first told me about this project, I was all ears. What's particularly interesting about this film is how it incorporates actual World War II history into the story, a part of history that is virtually unknown in the West, which we will discuss tonight. We're pleased to be joined by producer Ben Cooke and writer-director Jason Eric Perlman, who will give us the inside scoop on this cool project. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks so much for having us, Steve.
So, as the people who watch this show know, the first thing I always ask my guests is when they were little kids, what kind of movies did they watch and where did they watch them? I'll start with you, Jason.
My very first, and this will certainly date myself quite a bit, was The Dark Crystal. It was my very first movie I saw in a movie theater, and it just exposed to movies, period, the whole bit. And it was earth-shattering, shaking, however you want to put it for me. Not only was I mortally terrified by that movie, which I know is designed for the whimsy and the fantasy of children, but maybe I just caught it a little too early or something. But it sank in pretty deep, and ever since that experience and early on in my youth, I don't know why I wanted to kind of like re-traumatize myself, but I liked that kind of fantasy sci-fi type of material from then on. But that was my entree into the medium.
I can back you there, Jason. That movie was we're about the same age. And I didn't see it in the theater. It came out, I watched it on the movie channel or whenever it came out. And even then it was terrifying.
Yeah, it really was.
For a small kid,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years old, it was terrifying.
My first movie memory is Ray Walston, who later became my favorite Martian, floating in a life preserver in the middle of the Pacific while they were bombing Bali High, or one of those islands in the movie South Pacific. That was a little lighter than that. But tell me which cities you guys watched these first movies and what was your theater of choice at that time that you remember?
I grew up in Philadelphia, so we used to go to a little suburban theater called the Eric Theater, that was over by, some of your viewers may know, the King of Prussia Mall area, which is which at the time, the grand dam of shopping malls in the United States. It was the largest shopping mall in America. So right at the flanks of it was the Eric multiplex, which at that time was maybe 4 or 5 screens. And that's where I saw my first movies. And that continued through, middle school into high school as well.
My first experience that I recall was seeing The Empire Strikes Back with my mother in Neenah, Wisconsin, where I highly doubt anyone, well, everyone who knows me, who's going to watch this, obviously knows where that is, but that's central Wisconsin, kind of near Oshkosh, Green Bay area. And I remember as well, there was a shock to seeing these giant animated AT-AT walkers come stomping towards the screen.
Oh, yeah.
As Luke Skywalker is trying to get out of his crashed snow speeder before he gets crushed. I just had a real memory of that tension, right? Of that larger than life spectacle has always stayed with me. And that was probably what is Empire is like 79 or so, or 80 maybe. So I was
Actually,
probably
80.
about three.
Early 80s,
There you go,
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1980.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. No,
Yeah.
that's quite
I think the
memorable.
original was 77, right?
Yeah.
'77,
Something around that.
I was at Equicon, which was a science fiction convention by the LA airport, and I was a staff writer at that time for Cinefantastique magazine.
Hmm.
And I had a little table. I wasn't paid for my articles. I was their 1950s expert. I had just done a cover story on The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original. And I'm sitting there, and this blonde-haired boy came up to me and slashed his name across this. It's Mark Hamill. He said, "You'll remember that." And he wrote, "May the force be with you." And nobody knew what he was talking about. And this was a
Whoa.
year before Star Wars came out. And of course, I have no idea where that magazine is today. Unfortunately,
Wow.
lost to
That's
history.
wild.
But yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so let's talk a little bit how this project came together. There's a lot of elements to this story. Jason, you're the writer, you're the director. Tell us a little bit about how this came to you.
Well, the earliest drafts of what became this screenplay that we shot, I began in 2015. So it goes back a decade. Um, Very early rumblings of the concept were originating from at the time. I had a real fascination with the idea of reincarnation, not because I believed in it, not because I've experienced it, but I was curious about those who had, and I wanted to try to understand what that might mean for how, our existence is sewn together. If there was some kind of evidence for this in the population, I read a number of really interesting books, and it wasn't just because I wondered, do we live again and sort of go on, but more because of the idea of, is our current lifetime in some way preordained in working out issues that came from before? Are we repeating some sort of cycle to try to work out some kind of problem that we couldn't wrinkle or iron the wrinkle out, in a previous life or so forth? I just got very interested in that idea, and different cultures have similar thoughts about it, but very different rationales for why. The Hinduistic and the Buddhistic ideas are very different than what's in spiritual Kabbalah, which is early Judaic mysticism. Uh, they all have a notion of reincarnation, but they all have it in a little bit of a different context and rationale. So I just got very interested in the baseline of what would this mean if it were true. And looking into the film canon, it's only really like a handful of movies that have really touched on reincarnation. There's obviously Dead Again from the 80s, the Kenneth Branagh movie that I think was still pretty well done at the time. There's an interesting French film called Café de Flore that touches on it, that's more recent. But there's really not that many movies that have taken it up. And I thought, well, there's something interesting here. So I started, there was a merging of personal rationale for it, things going on in my own life that sort of led me into that inquiry. And then the concept itself was very interesting to me. And that started to generate, well, if I do want to work with this conceptually, how can I work it into a meaningful and relevant for our current time type of story? So that was the baseline of when it began, and
And obviously, it morphed into a time travel story.
yes, because uh, with so much popular understanding now of quantum physics and seeing the universe as this much more dynamic time and space flexible zone than we ever used to think it was, even 10 years ago. I mean, honestly, when I was at the dawn of conceiving this project, what's become sort of common knowledge and zeitgeist about quantum physics has changed radically. The idea of multiverse and time having retrocausality. You can do something now that changes things in the past, even without time travel stuff. That all became sort of a funnel cone into the idea of how do we modernize and make contemporary the idea of reincarnation thoughts by way of sort of a quantum physics, uh, very now sort of understanding.
So for the listeners and viewers who are watching the show, Sight is a very interesting setup. Basically, you actually start the movie in the late 1930s.
That's right.
This is a part of kind of a terrible time in history where the Japanese who were invading China were conducting these horrible experiments on Chinese civilians as part of something called Unit 731. Um, where did that come from for you, Jason, in terms of had you done some historical research? I mean, I'm curious how all of a sudden you're talking about reincarnation, you're talking about time travel and quantum mechanics. All of a sudden, we're involved with Chinese civilians being tortured.
Yeah, it would seem like a big leap. And there's an organic way that found its way into the story. So part of what I wanted to deal with thematically, even taking this reincarnation and quantum theory ideas on board, was both showing a karmic past on the individual plane and also showing a karmic past, excuse me, on a societal plane. Sort of taking the individual and upresing it to societal events. And there was a number of storylines originally in the different time frames that we had conceived, and things started to streamline. And the Japanese invasion of northern China, of Manchuria, became the more topical concentration of the story when our EP, a woman named Yvonne Supankit, got involved. And she actually has her roots in China. Her whole father's side of her family hails from a very nearby region of China where these events occurred. And as she and I were starting to talk into the early drafts of the story, actually midway drafts of the story, let's put it, we knew collectively, and this Ben was even involved very, very integrally at this time too. We knew we wanted to use the backdrop of a tremendously problematic part of history, and a part of history that was near field enough that it's documented, that it's fairly known, although 731 and a lot of these events in Manchuria during the precursor of World War II are not well known in the West. And I'll sort of loop back to that in a second. But we knew we wanted to use a real world historical atrocity, for lack of a better word, something that would leave a karmic stain, a reverberation through time of significant suffering that's going to echo through generations, it's going to echo through time and space, kind of given these concepts we're playing with. So we wanted to decide to use something that was real, because to fabricate and to make something like that up is not only disingenuous, but it's also just, I just don't think it would work. So we wanted to use something that was a real event, but we didn't want to play into things that were too terribly well known. I mean, there's been many, many, many different movies and novels and so forth about other events during World War II, certainly the Holocaust in Western Europe and so forth. And there's many, even 20th century atrocities to choose from. It's sad to say, but once our EP got involved with sort of talking through story and reading versions of the script, it became a very interesting part of a very sadly very atrocious part of history to look at, but to actually use as a story element. Because the other thing we wanted to make sure we were doing in terms of these ideas was to be confronting cultures that didn't know anything about one another or these histories. So when we do invoke Unit 731 and the invasion of Manchuria in the story, we wanted to make sure that it would be something that the characters who are experiencing and being forced to empathically and compassionately feel and see these events would have no understanding of what they were seeing. They would have no context to even be able to understand in even a some kind of stray thought what they were experiencing. Because if it was something like, let's say the Holocaust or something that was a little bit more near field, even in warfare from the United States, since the story takes place here, Vietnam or something like that, there would be a framework for the character to kind of at least have some sense of what they might be experiencing and seeing. So we wanted to move away from that and pick a historical event that played into the themes, of course, that we were trying to unpack here, but also to make sure that it was confronting our characters with a forced collision of empathy and understanding for a series of events that they didn't live through and that they didn't have heretofore any knowledge of.
Well,
So,
I like the fact that your lead character is not a scientist. He's about the most unscientist. He works in a real estate company. He's basically arrives at this distressed property, this gigantic building. I guess they want to turn it into a school.
yeah.
And his job is to prepare it for a site survey by the buyers. And the last thing he wants to do is bump into a botched time travel experiment that's been closed down, and they've left it there with all the radioactivity. This was not cleaned very well. Now Ben and I used to talk. Ben and I go back a ways because we used to love to talk about genre stuff. I know Ben is a big fan of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and certainly we had our Lord of the Rings discussions over the years. But Ben, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Jason and this very interesting project.
Sure. Well, Jason and I go back even further than you and I, Steve. About 25 years when he was a bright-eyed grad student over at USC, uh, producing some projects that I crewed on, and we just sort of formed a relationship and a friendship during that time that has gone through. And as you know, Steve, most of my career has been spent in public relations. Um, I did a few years in sort of crewing different shoots in the entertainment industry here, and then got into PR for a long time. Um, Shortly before COVID, I want to say I started to venture back into screenwriting a little bit. And Jason graciously would review my early drafts of my material and give me notes. And he kicked to me this screenplay at the time called Spiral, which was the original name of Sight. And that iteration, as I think Jason pointed out before, had at least one other time frame in it. I think in
Yeah,
Morocco.
several. Yeah.
Um, Before it got streamlined, and thankfully it did, because I think we would have had a real entangled movie with all those other ones. Though I did love that script, and I read it and I got done reading. I called him, I think the same day, and I was like, "This is awesome. This is my type of movie." We Jason and I bonded over everything from Kubrick to movies like Jacob's Ladder, a very sort of
Big
standout
influence.
cult classic, creepy, you know, genre blending movie from the 90s. And this felt like that. and I didn't feel like we were getting enough movies like this. And the story is really, to me, about these kind of hidden supernatural cosmic quantum level ways in which we mistreat each other and we damage our own relationships. And I just loved that. I thought that was such a cool thing to explore, something that even seems possible. And you know, the Unit 731 of it, I'd never heard of it. As a matter of fact, everyone I have spoken to outside of certain members of this production and cast who, you know, were like raised around this information, certainly in the United States and the West, they've never heard of this before. And, you know, I felt it was a unique way to sort of introduce this part of hidden history, at least in the West, to certain audiences. And we worked really hard to take great care in depicting all of that, by the way. But anyway, Jason really was like, well, why don't you jump in on this with me and produce it? And we got another friend of ours to join in, and we started packaging it together, and the financing came through, and off we were.
I wanted to ask you about the financing because all over Hollywood, all over the world, frankly, people write screenplays. They spend sometimes years developing it and nothing ever happens. Obviously, you guys found money to make this happen. And what would you say was the factor that got you the deal, that got you the money? If you had to point to one thing that you were very fortunate to have happen.
Honestly, it was the material, and not because the material was so great that it was like, you know, undeniable to the finance community. Of course not. It was the fact that it was the right type of project for who was our main financier to take interest. And once, as we well know, one financial interest takes the stock of a project, it can be catalytic for others doing the same. No one tends to want to be the first one in, no matter at what financial scale. But we had the good fortune of, you know, having a significant commitment, um, based on the story we were trying to tell and its uniqueness. And I think that the initial financier felt very similar to what Ben just spoke to in terms of his reaction to the material initially as well. Um, that it was something that wasn't painting by numbers. It wasn't sort of filling an expected slot. I mean, yes, it had earmarks of certain genre trappings that we knew we wanted to certainly pay heed to, but it was unique enough and new enough that it catalyzed interest at the time. And um,
I like to say, in regards to this, that there's a certain definition of luck, that is preparedness meeting opportunity. And honestly, on, you know, opportunity struck and we were prepared. We had a tight script. We had a great team. We had a great pitch deck built around it. We understood the financials. We had budgets done. We knew our shit. And pardon me if I can't say that on here, Steve.
No, we're allowed to say every cuss word in the world because we've been cussing a lot lately.
Free reign. Here we go.
It really came to that because money doesn't just often fall in your lap, you know, but when it does, and when that financial opportunity strikes, you got to be ready to seize on that. And I think we definitely were. And to Jason's point with our financier, I think we found that across every level, from our cast to our production designer, other people who joined the team. They loved the script, they loved the concept, the themes, the story we were telling, and it really resonated with them. They wanted to be a part of it.
Well, certainly a character in this story is your location. I think
Mm.
that obviously, as I mentioned earlier, to the people who don't know the setup of the movie, the character played by Jake McLaughlin, Neil, who works for this real estate company, comes across this property which he has to evaluate for a sale to make sure it's safe. And tell us a little bit about finding this location and the search for something like this.
Wow, this is fun. We looked everywhere. In fact, we were even in conversation with the countries of Estonia and Latvia, Lithuania,
Italy.
um, Italy. I believe Kelly, our cohort in producing, even spoke to people in Colombia in South America. And of course, throughout the United States, here in California, we interviewed the possibility, and Ohio, New York State, Texas. I mean, we scratched every hidden scratch off that could have been the lottery win for where the heck we could shoot this. But we had two really particular needs, and they seem easy enough to meet in theory, but they became extremely difficult. We wanted something that presented as sort of anywhere USA. We wanted something that was very non-specific, that was bucolic and pastoral and sort of off, didn't identify as any recognizable place or city. Um, and we also needed at least the exteriors of these larger, believable structures. So, every state, every country has its industry, it has its textiles, it has its energy sector. You would imagine that these sort of derelict buildings would be easy enough to come by just about anywhere because we needed our big exterior of our particle collider building. And of course, we needed to find what's presently behind you, Steve, the set for the exterior of Harbin, China, where those Unit 731 had been conducting their experiments. So the particle collider set was a little bit more, let's see what might look right. I mean, even if it was, look, Stranger Things did it sort of in a nondescript uh, corporate office, right, in the Midwest. So, we were open to different ideas of what that exterior could look like. But when it came to 731, and 731, I should correct, is not actually a place. It was the detachment of the Japanese Kwantung Army that conducted the events that happened in Harbin, China. But the facility in Harbin that we wanted to make as convincingly reminiscent of the real structure, which is very, very hard to actually even visualize because most of the structure was completely destroyed after World War II and the end of the war. So there's only very, very few and far between archival photographs of what it actually looked like. But it was a brick structure and it had multiple different different wings to it and different separate buildings and the most sort of I don't want to say iconic because that's the wrong word, but the most emblematic image of what the structure used to look like were the crematorium towers, the smokestacks, the brick smokestacks, which actually still stand and are part of a memorial that still is extant on the site today that you can visit.
And you
Uh,
found them in North Carolina.
we ended up finding as close to a representative standing set to you know eye match with what we were able to historically research as being the look of those structures in North Carolina. That is correct.
Yeah. When we when we got financing, we set to work on sort of fulfilling this Venn diagram, Steve, of having the right locations, having the right tax incentives, and also sort of the infrastructure to support a production crew, rental houses, that sort of thing. And when you do this, you basically begin interfacing with state film offices, right?
Yeah.
And you send them your location requirements, and they've got some scouts sort of on staff, and they'll just start sending you photos, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos. And we did this in New Mexico, Austin. I remember, Jason, we were in contention for kind of a one-stop shop place just outside of Atlanta that
Yes.
would have been
Norcross.
sort of a
Yes.
dream scenario because it had virtually everything we needed, including a tunnel.
Yeah.
We looked at a lot of tunnels. We looked at one that's hidden underneath downtown Los Angeles.
Yeah. The old subways, the old subway car tunnels.
And
What was wrong with the old subway tunnel under LA?
I think there was about 10,000 reasons a day why.
Yeah.
LA permits will kill you.
And yeah, it was cool. It's been used quite a bit. It was like in one of the John Wick movies, and it's
Right.
It wasn't easy to get electricity down there. You'd have to
No,
throw stinger boxes from the floor above. It had a lot of complex demerits against using. I mean, it's very cool. It's a
sure.
relic of, lost time that's really worth seeing if you're into that sort of thing. It's still there, but
Well, we're talking about the exteriors, but let's talk a
hmm,
little bit about this
yeah.
time I don't know what you call it, the time vortex set or the
Hmm.
control room.
all right.
Obviously, we've seen this kind of remind me a little bit of Stargate, the idea of
Yeah.
the control room. Which is, of course, a nice reference because Stargate was a different. Now, you're shooting exteriors in North Carolina. Were you able to use sound stages in North Carolina as well?
Yeah, we found
Mhm.
in addition to those exteriors, we found this is another big search. So, the film office in Charlotte, I really felt like they rolled the red carpet out for us. They really wanted us to shoot there. They were taking us around to all these places, dozens and dozens of locations before we saw what became that prison camp set and our exterior. But, and I think if I remember correctly, we're driving around this big van, and when Jason saw these things, he's like, "That's it. This is
We
the
saw
building.
we saw the
That's the
exterior
building."
of the big what became the exterior of the particle collider set very early in the morning, the very first day we were in Charlotte being toured around. And
Yeah,
this was at least like an hour and a half out of town, very, very far out in sort of the eastern countryside outside of Charlotte City proper. And we saw it, and I think unanimously were like,
yeah.
that's it. It was
But
so bizarre and huge and unlike any other building any of us had ever really seen, that it
yeah,
was, yeah.
the uniqueness, the size of it, the strangeness, is really what drew us there. But the soundstage thing, we had we looked and looked. There was a couple of sort of professional stages there, where we could build sets and live. But what we ended up finding that worked very well, for all of our needs, was a recently sort of a not abandoned, but it was a rezoned industrial lot that had a series of buildings and a warehouse and offices, not in great shape, but it was all getting set. It was like in the middle of an environmental review to be torn down for condos. So it was just sitting there, and it's like, well, why don't we give you a couple of bucks to hang out here? And in that warehouse, we built 5 or 6 sets in there, including our lab and our tunnel. We Another building off on the other side of the lot was Garrison's real estate office, where Neil works.
Yeah.
Um, we had all kinds of things that we were able to build in there and just kind of call our base for the two and a half
Yeah.
months that we're
That
in
was
Charlotte.
that was a saving grace because without having all of that nested in one place where production design and construction could work and really form all of our required, really lived in sets. There was a handful that we would do on location, but that was our main hub. And I honestly, thinking back now, having each of those sets being in different places and requiring company moves and requiring a whole different days to dress and break down and build and so I don't know how we would have done it. I don't know if we even could have done it. So it was a bit of kismet when we found that, and it was at the right time for that structure to say, hey, you're not going to hurt anything because all we're going to do is tear the thing down to the dirt anyway. So
Always,
it
always
worked out
good
real
to,
well.
always good to hear. Now, Jason, your previous film Threshold did very well. It was a multi-awarded film. Were you able to pull some of your key crew from that film, or did you have to start from scratch on this one?
I don't think anyone from that production worked with me on this one.
Got it. Got it.
That was a very different scale project, and it was also something that was shot here in California. So, when we knew we were going to be pulling up stakes and living in Charlotte, North Carolina for, what ended up being really elapsed about 3 months to make the film, pre-production, shooting, tear down, etc. No, this was a whole new cast of characters, crew, and otherwise.
When you get approved, or when you're trying to get approved for some type of tax incentive, one of those things you need to maximize is your local hiring. And we needed to find as much crew and resource as we possibly could to spend in state in order to make sure we were meeting the requirements that we had set up there.
Well, we've been talking about the physical part of the filmmaking, but I have to say that the key in movies like this is the performers. And I have to give you guys credit. The performances I thought were just terrific in this film. Let's talk
Thank
a
you.
little bit about the cast. Let's start with Jake McLaughlin, who plays Neil. I thought he was a wonderfully charismatic actor, a great hero type. How did you get introduced to him?
Really through our casting director.
Oh, okay.
We worked with Kelly Roy, who's a wonderful casting director who's been a friend of this production since early on. And we had a very interesting criterion for what we wanted from our Neil, which was someone who was affable and relatable and someone who you feel like you might, know a shade of in your own life. Yes, Neil is a character that has made a handful of rather significant mistakes, and he has a good amount of judgment to be leveled at him across the story. But nevertheless, we didn't want to demonize the character at all. Certainly not from sort of preconception from the start of the story. So we wanted to find someone who had that sort of engaging affability of someone we would call if we were locked out of our house, that you trust and that you feel is like sort of nearby and a good confidant. So, we went through a pretty hearty casting process of looking at potentials for Neil, who really is, obviously the main character that all this situation orbits around. And when Kelly Roy suggested Jake, and we all went back and looked at his more recent work and what he's capable of in range as an actor, it became a unanimous no-brainer that he was the guy, and the wonderful sort of put it up to fate toward a sort of add-on with Jake is that the guy rides dirt bikes with his kids all the time.
I was
I mean, he literally, we didn't, except for legal reasons, really didn't even need a stunt double. I mean, he's like, he's
that
the
was
guy who lived the role in so many ways. So
that was
it was, yeah,
that was
okay.
going to be my add-on. Actually, it was like obviously agreeing with everything Jason said, but also he had to be believable on a dirt bike. And some of the folks we were looking at, I don't think would be able to pull it off.
No, that's very true. And that should never, it certainly shouldn't be the criterion that you use as, a guillotine to axe a potential amazing actor to play a role, but it plays into a believability and sort of a slice of life, real grist that you need to buy in. And there were actors that we looked at and that we were suggested early on that we did say, I don't think this guy looks like he can ride a dirt bike. I don't think he's going to take a punch, frankly, in a in a believable way, and get back up. And with Jake, we felt that there was a real synergy between. And look, you don't ever want to cast somebody because you believe they're also just sort of a seamless one-to-one with the character. You need the actor to find great friction and difference with who they're playing, because otherwise it's not interesting. But we did feel that a lot of the sort of nuts and bolts of who we wanted Neil to be were embodied by what Jake brought to the table, just natively as a person.
Well, your second lead, played by Theo Rossi, who plays Garrison Vay. I really thought he brought a great deal of gravitas to his role because well, basically he's Neil's boss. They're both in this real estate company, and he brought some real energy to the role. Did you think that he would be this good?
I had I had a phone call with Theo fairly early on, and we talked about a lot of the subject matter and more of sort of the philosophical, farther reaching elements that are in the story. And when I was familiar with his work, I had seen him in Sons of Anarchy. I had seen some of his more recent indie films as well. Um, when I spoke to him, and even though he was playing a role where he wasn't going to be sort of the vehicle for much of the philosophy in the movie, let's say, the fact that he was as inclined towards some of the ideas and familiar and invested in some of the ideas that the story was bringing forth was the right kind of connection with him as an actor that I felt. Not only was he able to go where he was going to ultimately go when his arc does go somewhere very different from where he begins in the story, but that he was going to have the sensitivity and the receptivity to play the nuances throughout that are aware of sort of the holistic story that we're telling. And you can work two different ways. You can work a lot of different ways, but in two macro different ways, I think, with an actor where you feel like the actor is aware of what the entire piece is saying, and they play a bit into that, and you converse with them about that. Or, and I know some directors don't like to do this at all, but you keep the actors away from sort of the holistic sort of meaning umbrella of the story, and you just work with them in the individual scenes and trust that ultimately when they're all put together that the holistic statement is going to be there. But I felt with something like this, when I did find that Theo was as receptive to some of the ideas and as conversant in some of the ideas that we were going to be putting forward, that even though he was playing something of an antithetical character and an antagonist, for lack of a better description for him, um, that he was perfectly suited for the nuance of where he was going to change as our view of him within the story changed, and he was going to be able to play those adjustments from a very savvy and very sage place because he was already plugged into some of these concepts. So that became almost like an instantaneous trust bridge between him and I uh, to go forward together, I think.
Much of the harrowing part of the story takes place when we're suddenly back in the 30s in China. And I thought you cast some terrific Asian actors.
Mm.
I believe this is Yosan An. Is that how you
Yeah.
pronounce it?
Yeah.
And tell us a little, tell the audience, since they're from unfamiliar, what his character is.
So Yosan plays the father of a small nuclear family, a wife, himself, and their child, who are in the very beginning of the movie, uh, unbeknownst to them where they're going, taken away to this prison camp in Harbin, China. They were just rural, a rural family living outside of the city, outside of really the crosshairs of anything having to do with the greater theater of World War II, what became World War II. This is a little earlier than when it is technically thought to have begun, but they are totally bemused by what's happening to them. You know, they believe that the Japanese that are invading their small town are looking for builders, for people who have construction abilities, and that was actually true to history. That the initial the initial building of what became the prison camps in Harbin were done by the local Chinese in the area, completely unaware of what it was going to become or what it was intended to be. And people who had construction skills or had worked in that line of trade were the first drafted, so to speak, conscripted into this institution to build it, and then very sadly and very ridiculously horribly were some of the first victims within it as well. So that is where this family that we open with finds their trajectory through the story.
Ben, I did you find your Asian actors in the Carolinas, or did you have to find them elsewhere?
Um, Kelly Roy, who I should add, was on the team very early. So even going back, she was an integral slide in our pitch deck for financing, right? Like, here's this amazing casting director. Her and her team have done amazing projects within our genre, all the Conjuring films, all the way up to huge movies like Aquaman. She loved the script and was very close with one of our other producers, Kelly Hayes, and they had worked together. And our key Asian cast, I believe, came through there. We did work with a local casting agent for background and some of the other sort of day players, etc. But Yosan was another blessing. I mean,
Yeah.
this guy is just the greatest. He's super nice, super collaborative, goes all in. I mean, we're talking about a guy who is second build on the Mulan live action remake, and honestly, it's not a huge role either, but it's every time he's on screen, he's doing so much, right? Like
Yeah.
the moments he's on there, he's got to act his ass off, and he does it brilliantly. And he's just a super fantastic guy to boot.
And
Yeah.
then Corey Young is the
Mm-hmm.
kid, is the boy, and then
Yes,
Danny Wang is the mother.
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah,
Both extraordinary. Both
so
extraordinary.
extraordinary.
Yeah, Corey came to us from, I believe, the local casting because he's based in the Southeast. Danny
That's
is
right.
a veteran actor from out our way in California that we brought in for this role. Yosan actually is predominantly based in New Zealand, so that was a bit more far flung to have him involved. But they just the three of them, and it's fun because there's been so much reflection now that the movie's been released, and everybody's sort of looking back nostalgically at the shoot and so forth, that the three of them, Danny, Corey, and Yosan, really did gel in such a beautiful connective way during the making of the movie, both as people, hanging out in their trailers as individuals, but when it came to being on screen, the believability of their emotion and their true connectivity as a family, it is so painfully realized and so authentic, that we continue to feel like their contribution to this film is more than uh, the sum of its parts. I mean, they are just as equivalent in the heft and the impact of this movie as our leads that seem to occupy the bulk of screen time. But the presence of the three of them on screen and what they go through and how they interact and how they emote together in such a believable, authentic way is, to me, one of the things that I'm truly most proud about with the film.
Fun story with Danny, who plays Zai Feng, the mother. Um, she flew in. We've been filming for a few weeks before we were getting to the Chinese family stuff, and I picked her up at the airport, and I was kind of explaining to me how she got involved in this, and she got the script, and she revealed to me in the car ride that she grew up in this region where this atrocity took place.
Yeah.
And she was quite upset that nobody knew about this, right? Particularly here in the United States, it's never discussed. It's not sort of taught in history classes as part of the overall war. We tend to mostly learn about the European theater. And she was so passionately driven to be in this movie. I think it really shows in her performance. She's
Yeah.
been super supportive, ever since with the movie being released. Her story is a great one, and another kismet relationship that we were able to form in the making of this movie.
So we've laid out a very nice cinema meal. Now, how does the audience start to dine on this film? Where can they find it? What's the deal with the distribution as of today, this being the middle of August?
Yeah, so we're everywhere that you can rent movies online right now. We had a quick theatrical, but for I'm when this airs and in the near term, we're certainly rentable on Amazon, Apple, YouTube, Google, even on demand services through like your cable and dish um, providers. We'll probably end up getting into a subscription VOD sort of deal later this year. That's sort of to be determined and ironed out, but we continue to hope, obviously, that it'll have wide access,
Yeah.
So let
so
me
people can discover the film.
well, we certainly wish you all a great deal of luck with this project. It's always already getting some very nice reviews. Jason, what's next for you?
I have a good kettle of fish. I am working on a movie that I wrote that I'm also producing that we hope to shoot early next year, actually in Australia. I also have two television projects that are actively moving forward. One that would be set in the UK and one that is here in Los Angeles. That's been very hard fought and hard won across a number of years. That looks like we're getting closer to seeing that realized in the coming months. And I also have two features that I've written for myself to look into directing as my next project. So a number of good irons and in different fires, and it's just a question of which which plant needs the most water at a given time, and that's the one that gets it.
What about you, Ben? You going to stay in this wacky business?
Um, well, I guess we'll see if they let me.
Sure they will.
I sort of, Jason and I have formed a production company around this, and some of his projects are tied to that. While we were sort of in post production on this, I came up with sort of a suitable. I would say Jason's are like taking his talents to the next level. I wrote a script that's sort of at site level, I would say, budget wise, and genre wise. So we'll see where that leads as well.
Well, good luck on your endeavors, everyone. We have been enjoying a very nice conversation with director Jason Eric Perlman, my old friend Ben Cooke. The movie is called Sight. It's a gripping science fiction adventure story. Well, I'd say it's more drama than adventure, but there's some adventurous moments and
Mhm.
certainly some harrowing moments in the juxtaposition of these different worlds. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having us,
having us.
Steve. Really
You
appreciate it.
you've been watching Saturday Night at the Movies on YouTube, on our Fast channel, True TV Plus, and for those of you who have the audio on the podcast of your choice, if you like the show, please don't hesitate to give us a thumbs up. We always appreciate that. And again, thank you for joining. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
Steve.
having us. Really appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening.